Alright, this is Final Christmas, a comic I said I would never review because I cannot really review it. But here it is anyway as my annual begrudging Christmas video. This review has been like 2 or 3 years in the making. I have tried to do it again and again, but man alive, is this a tough one to review. This is issue 6, and I have no idea what is going on, and I take responsibility for that. I have never read issues 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. I only ever had issue 6 and 7. I mainly wanted to show all the covers there to criticise them for being terrible. It feels as if the artists had a collection of character portraits that were done totally independent of Final Christmas, and then DC told them not to bother doing covers for Final Christmas because they will use his portraits instead. They are abysmal covers for a crossover. They tell you nothing other than the one of Darkseid. They are worthless to Final Christmas. The art in general is maybe one of my biggest annoyances in this. There's like 7 artists. Half of them aren't even listed on the cover. And this has always been a problem with DC crossovers. There was only one Jorge Perez. Nobody else is capable of drawing an entire crossover all by themselves. This is written by Van Morrison, and I am sure that it does read better if you actually have the whole thing. But I do want to say that each time I try to read this, the issue becomes easier. I understand it a little bit more each time. I can follow the individual strands. Issue 7 still feels like a lost cause, and I still think I cannot review that one. What probably doesn't help is that Van Morrison writes for themselves. You have to invest to stand a chance of enjoying a lot of Van Morrison, and I've never had issues 1 to 5. I am at a major deficit. We have this scene at the start with Superman and Mentor from the Imperial Guards, and Mentor shows Superman Van Morrison super science weapon called the Miracle Machine. It isn't mentioned again in this issue, as we cut to the Justice League satellite, where Canary inducts a man with tattoos as an honorary member of the Justice League. Final Christmas. The plot of Final Christmas is Darkseid. Darkseid is the big bad. He finally has the world annihilation incantation formula, and things are all fucked now. I am really looking forward to the effect the next sequence will have on one of my viewers' brains. On Earth, we have some heroes fighting off Darkseid's armies. And one of our main fights is 2000s era Supergirl fighting Darkseid corrupted Mary Marbles. If you thought that Supergirl dressing like Britney Spears was painful, how do you feel about Mary Marbles dressing like a member of Slipknot? This Mary Marbles plot comes from Countdown to Final Christmas, And Van Morrison seemed to think that her simply wearing a black version of her costume wasn't enough. So we have a Mary Marbles that looks more like Joker's wench than Darkseid's slave. The fight between the two, Supergirl and Mary Marbles, it's fine, but I feel that it isn't colossal enough to be the factor that a lot of the penultimate issue of a crossover is spent on. It is somewhat better suited to a tie-in issue of Supergirl, maybe. Worse is we have Tiger Marbles and Blastar, who is a tiger now too, and they are fighting. This stuff is lost on me. I don't know why Blastar is a tiger now, and I don't care for that being given more time than Supergirl fighting Mary Marbles, which I already said wasn't big enough for a crossover. So imagine how low down on the list two Tiger Men fighting is. They beat Mary Marbles by shebanging her back to her normal form. And the part where that happens is really understated and underplayed. But then you have Tiger Marbles beating Blastar and being accepted as the leader of Darkseid's Tiger Army. And this is a full page of comic. How is this given more space than the actual defeat of Mary Marbles? My problem with that Mary Marbles Supergirl fight is that it doesn't feel significant enough. It could easily be the big piece for a crossover, but what we see doesn't feel major or a notable fight when it should feel that way. Then we have another bit, and this really is like a collection of bits rather than a story. Part of what makes it difficult to review is how you're bouncing from bit to bit. I think even if I were to read the first 5 issues, I'm still going to be struggling to follow a lot of this. It's more likely you have to read all of Van Morrison's DC catalogue, like Justice League and the Seven Soldiers stuff. I mention Seven Soldiers because one of them is here, Miracle Man, the version of Miracle Man from that. And then we come to the set of pages that are loose in this copy. Makes it very hard to turn between them. But here is Wonder Woman with tusks. I'm sure that'll do something for somebody out there. Wonder Woman with a set of tusks. Whoa, isn't that erotic? Darkseid has corrupted her with the World Annihilation incantation formula, and he has corrupted a bunch of other heroes like Ara and Batwoman. I am going to say that this is a mess, but a big part of the mess is not Van Morrison. Van Morrison has some non-traditional writing, or at least a style that often requires rereads to really appreciate. And that doesn't really help. But artistically, art-wise, it is a mess. We have half a dozen artists. And look at the state of Canary. This ain't no Canary I ever heard of. Last time I checked, Canary was a beautiful woman called Katie Lotz, not a bloke in a wig. And then you have... This page has completely come out now, and I forgot this entirely. We have a scene with some scientists who are planning to leave this universe behind and find a new one because Darkseid has screwed this one up too much. There is a bit coming up where there is well, part of the problem with a comic that is just bits is that it's almost impossible to remember what order they come in. There is a one panel cutaway I want to point out, but I didn't make note of where it was. Anyway, this is a scene with Lenny Luthor and Dr. Nirvana, and I understand that this is the resolution to another subplot, but I am lacking the story that came before it to make me care about it. Then we have the flasks, the 3 flasks. Barney Allen came back from the dead to guest star in Final Christmas. It was some fan service, nothing more. It does not have anything to do with John Jeffries bringing Barney Allen back after this. And really, they should have rejected that pitch because Van Morrison had only recently brought the character back briefly. With respect to the flasks, the bits with them are about the one thing I understand in issue 7 because it is all set up in this one. And this here is the big scene. Batman v Darkseid. I think it is the big scene of the entire crossover even. This has a lot of weight. This is important. And this is one of the few things from Final Christmas that reverberates in the DC universe afterwards. Batman, he thinks that Darkseid is so evil that he deserves to die, and therefore Batman abandons his anti-gun stance to shoot Darkseid in the shoulder. And then Batman dies to Darkseid's smegma beams. Batman stays dead for a year or two after Final Christmas. And with this double splash page of Batman dying, the rest of the issue starts unravelling. And I think it is on this page where the bit that I want to point out is... we have this little panel showing us an injured Minuteman being carried away from battle, saying that he needs to be with his wife. Next page. Here is Minuteman, uninjured, with his wife. And these last few pages, I do not understand. I wanted to select that Minuteman bit, and you will see such again on the final page. I do not think the 6 or 7 artists working on this, I don't think the editor, were able to follow this. There is either awful communication going on, or these people were struggling to follow Van Morrison's script. The art changes every other page, and there are bits that outright contradict other bits. And this sequence as Superman arriving, charging into battle with his eye beams. And I don't know what he's attacking, but you can clearly see that he isn't holding anything. Except now we have another artist, and he is holding Batman's dead body. And his rage on the previous page was, I imagine, because his friend is dead. These last pages I do not understand in any way. Where is Darkseid? How did Superman get Batman's body without encountering Darkseid? What is he lashing out at? With that said, I understand about 70% of this. The bits are written well, the art is uneven, but there is some okay art, like the first scene with Canary adds good art. First time I read this, I understood like 10% of it. I didn't even realise Darkseid was the bad guy until the scene with him. The next issue, I still think I only understand 10% of. I do not think anyone will ever be able to say they understand Final Christmas 100% unless they are Van Morrison. I didn't recommend it for that. But on my 4th or 5th reread of this issue, I am getting closer and closer to comprehending it. I will give it 7 soldiers up.